Clara May Whitfield threw her last coin onto the boarding house counter and said the words she'd swallowed for 32 years. "Keep the change. I won't be needing the room." The matron didn't stop her. Nobody did. She walked out into the cold with $4, a worn carpet bag, and a name she'd been given like a verdict too much, too big, too broken to be wanted. She wasn't going anywhere. She was running from the only truth she'd ever been told about herself. She just didn't know yet that the truth was a lie. Before we go any further, if this story already has your heart, please subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss what comes next. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. Clara May did not cry when the matron said it. She had learned somewhere between girlhood and 32 that crying in front of a woman like Mrs. Holt only gave the woman more power. So she stood at the kitchen sink with her hands in soapy water, and she let the words land, and she kept scrubbing the iron pot like her life depended on it. "Every girl your age has already been chosen, Clara." Mrs. Holt's voice came from the doorway, smug and satisfied the way a cat sounds when it has cornered something smaller. "Married, settled, gone somewhere useful, and here you are, still here, still taking up space in my kitchen." Clara kept scrubbing. "I'm asking you plainly." Mrs. Holt stepped closer. "Is there something wrong with you? Some reason no man has come calling, or is it just—" She paused, and Clara heard the pause, felt the weight of what was being measured behind it. "Is it just the obvious?" Clara set the pot down on the rack. Slowly. She dried her hands on the rough towel hanging from the stove handle. She turned around. "No, ma'am," she said. Her voice was level. "I reckon it's just the obvious." Mrs. Holt smiled. The smile was worse than the words. "This house closes to boarders in 2 weeks. You'll want to make arrangements." She left. Her footsteps faded down the hall. The kitchen went quiet except for the pop of the wood stove and the sound of Clara's own breathing. She stood there a long moment. Then she went back to washing the pot. She had learned that too, that grief was something you worked through, not something you stopped for. That the body kept going even when some part of you deep down was sitting very still and very alone on a cold train platform 3 years ago, watching a man pick up his bag and walk away without saying a word. He had placed the advertisement himself, seeking a wife capable and sturdy for a ranch in the Dakota Territory. She had answered in her best handwriting. He had written back twice. She had saved the money for 3 months to buy the train ticket. She had traveled 4 days. And he had looked at her stepping off that train, and his face had done something she would never forget. Not horror, nothing as dramatic as that. Just a quiet collapse, like a man watching rain ruin a crop he'd counted on, and he'd said, "You're not what I had in mind, miss. I'm sorry for your trouble," and walked away. She had stood on that platform for 40 minutes before she could make her legs move. She had never told anyone. What was there to tell? She had been foolish enough to hope. That was the whole story. Now she dried the last dish, hung the towel, and went to her room to think. She had $4.22. She had a carpet bag with 2 dresses, a Bible, and her mother's recipe book. She had 2 weeks before Mrs. Holt's boarding house stopped being an option. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed and looked at the floor. That was when she heard it, or rather saw it the next morning at church, tacked to the bulletin board near the back pew with a nail that hadn't been hammered in straight. A piece of paper handwriting slanted hard to the right like the man who'd written it had been in a hurry, or maybe just exhausted. Widower. 2 daughters. Need a housekeeper, someone to care for the children. Wages negotiable. Hargrove Ranch. Calhoun Flats, Colorado. Send word or come directly. Time is of the matter. The last line was smudged. She thought it probably said, "Time is of the essence," but the ink had run, and it read instead, like a man who didn't quite know how to say what he needed. She read it 3 times. Then she unpinned it and put it in her coat pocket. That night, she wrote a letter. She kept it plain. "My name is Clara May Whitfield. I am 32 years old, capable, hard-working, and in good health. I have experience keeping house and cooking for large households. I am good with children. I can come immediately if you will have me." She signed it and folded it and addressed it. Then she looked at what she had written and added one more line at the bottom. "I should tell you plainly, I am a large woman. I want you to know before I make the trip so there are no misunderstandings on arrival." She posted it the next morning and bought a train ticket with the rest of her money before she could talk herself out of it. She never received a reply. She went anyway. The train pulled into Calhoun Flats on a Thursday afternoon in October, and Clara May stepped onto the platform and immediately saw that she had competition. There were 3 of them, young women, pretty in the particular way that Calhoun Flats would consider pretty, meaning they were thin and neat and wore their hair up in a way that suggested propriety without sacrificing vanity. They were laughing together when Clara stepped down, and one of them glanced over and then glanced away, the way you glance away from something that doesn't concern you. Clara recognized the glance. She had been on the receiving end of it enough times to know its precise meaning. She looked past them to the far end of the platform. A man stood near a wagon with his hat pulled low and his arms crossed over his chest. He was tall and lean in the way of men who work hard and eat whatever's available, not whatever they prefer. His face was weathered. His coat was clean but old. He looked like a man who had made peace with his own exhaustion. Behind him, pressed close to the wagon, like they were trying to disappear into it, were 2 little girls. The older one, Clara would learn later, was Ada. She was 9 years old, and she stood with her chin up and her arms at her sides in the posture of a child who has decided the only safe thing to do is pretend she is not afraid. Her hair was dark and unbrushed. Her dress was too short in the hem. The younger one was Nora. She was 4. She was holding the back of her father's coat with both fists, and her face was turned into the wool of it, so Clara could only see the back of her head. Small dark curls. A ribbon that had come most of the way undone. Clara watched the 3 young women approach the man. The blonde spoke first. She tilted her head at an angle that suggested she already knew the answer was going to be in her favor. "You'd be Mr. Hargrove, I expect?" "I would." His voice was low and flat, the voice of a man who had run out of the energy required for pleasantries. "I'm Miss Beaumont. I've come about your advertisement." She smiled. "What are the wages?" "Room board and $8 a month." The smile shifted. 8. She said it the way you'd say mud. "For 2 children, I'd need 14 at the least, and my own room with a proper lock and every Sunday free." "I don't have 14. "Then I'm afraid we won't be able to come to an agreement." She turned to the other 2 with a small shrug. "Shall we?" The second woman looked at the children with an expression that wasn't quite pity and wasn't quite distaste, but sat somewhere unpleasant between the 2. "Are they well behaved?" she asked. "I won't take a position where the children are wild. It puts years on you." Eli Hargrove's jaw moved once. "Their mother died 5 months ago. They're not wild. They're sad." "Yes, well." She adjusted her gloves. "Grief can make children very difficult." She left with the others. They were already talking about something else before they reached the end of the platform. Clara had been standing still this whole time, carpetbag in hand, watching. Little Nora had turned her face out from her father's coat to watch them go. And then, because children do things that adults have forgotten how to do, she started to cry. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just the silent tears of a child who has seen something she didn't have words for yet, that nobody wanted to stay. Clara's feet moved before she made any decision to move them. She was halfway across the platform when one of the departing women turned and saw her. Her expression went from mild surprise to open amusement in the space of about a second and a half. "Lord above," the woman said not quietly. "What do we have here?" Clara did not look at her. She kept walking. "Honey," the woman called, and her voice carried because God had made that kind of voice to carry, "You cannot be serious." Clara May Whitfield stopped in front of Eli Hargrove and looked at him straight. He looked back at her. She watched him take in her size, the breadth of her shoulders, the full weight of her, the plain brown dress and the worn boots and the carpet bag that had seen better decades. She watched his face. She was good at watching faces by now. She had learned to read the exact moment when disappointment arrived. It didn't arrive. He just looked at her, waiting the same flat, quiet patience he'd used with the other women. "My name is Clara May Whitfield," she said. "I wrote you a letter." "I didn't get any letter," he said. "No, I reckoned you might not. I came anyway." She took a breath. The woman on the platform was still saying something, but Clara had stopped hearing her. "I need to tell you something before we go any further, Mr. Hargrove, so you can make an honest decision and we don't waste each other's time." He waited. "I am not fit for any man," Clara said. Her voice did not shake. She had said it enough times now that the shake had gone out of it, replaced by something older and harder. "I know that. I have known that for a good while. I'm too much of everything the wrong things, and not enough of anything the right ones, or so I've been told, and I have stopped arguing the point." Behind Eli Hargrove, Ada had gone very still. Her chin was still up, but her eyes had moved to Clara's face. The woman on the platform made a sound like a laugh. Clara did not look away from Eli. "But I can love your daughters," she said. "I can feed them properly, and teach them, and keep them warm, and make them feel safe. I can be steady. I can stay. I know you've had people leave, Mr. Hargrove. I know, because I read your letter, and I read between the lines of it, and a man only writes time is of the matter when he's running out of both." She paused. "I will not leave." The platform was very quiet. Eli Hargrove looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked down at his younger daughter, who had stopped crying and was staring at Clara with enormous dark eyes, her fists still wrapped in the back of his coat. He bent down. He said very quietly, "Nora, sweetheart." Nora looked up at him. "This is Miss Clara," he said. "She's come a long way." Nora looked at Clara. Clara crouched down, ignoring what crouching did to her bad knee, so that she was level with the little girl's face. "Hello, Nora," Clara said softly. "That's a pretty ribbon in your hair." Nora reached up and touched the half-undone ribbon. Then she looked at Clara with the devastating directness that only 4-year-olds possess. "Can you tie it back?" she asked. "Papa can't tie ribbons good." Clara's chest did something complicated. "I can tie it just fine," she said. She set down her carpetbag and took the ribbon ends in her fingers and tied them back into a bow. Nora stood perfectly still and let her, and when it was done, she turned her head this way and that to feel it settle. "It's good," Nora announced. Clara stood back up. When she raised her eyes, Eli Hargrove was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite name. It wasn't gratitude exactly. It was closer to the look of a man who has been underwater for 5 months and has just broken the surface and is still deciding whether air is real. "Wagon's over here," he said. "It's an hour's ride." "I don't mind a ride," Clara said. She picked up her carpetbag. As she turned to follow him, Ada moved for the first time. The older girl stepped out from behind her father and placed herself squarely in Clara's path. She was small, and her dress was too short, and her chin was up, and her eyes were the same dark brown as her father's, and they were absolutely, completely, entirely unfriendly. "The last woman lasted 9 days, Ada said. Her voice was steady and clear. "The one before that lasted 11. The one before that didn't make it to supper." Clara looked at her. "What happened to the one who didn't make it to supper?" "She said Nora was too loud and asked Papa to make her stop crying." Ada's eyes didn't flicker. "Papa told her to go." "Well," Clara said, "crying is just how a person tells the truth when they don't have the words yet. I don't mind crying." Ada studied her for a moment. The study was thorough and professional and would have done credit to a woman 3 times her age. "You're big," Ada said. "I am," Clara agreed. "Did you know that before you came?" "I have been aware of it for some time, yes." Ada considered this. "Papa's a bad cook. I'm a good one. He burns everything. Most men do." Something moved in Ada's face, not quite a smile, nothing so generous as that, but a slight shift in the quality of her wariness, the way ice shifts just before it starts to think about thawing. She stepped aside and let Clara pass. The wagon ride was an hour, and it was almost entirely silent, which suited Clara fine. She sat in the wagon bed with Nora, who had transferred from her father's coat to Clara's arm, with the easy, terrifying trust of a small child who has nothing left to lose. Ada sat up front beside her father, with her arms folded and her back straight, watching the road. Clara watched the land. Colorado in October was a cold, flat, honest kind of beautiful, the kind that doesn't apologize for itself and doesn't soften its edges for company. She had grown up in Ohio, which was green and gentle, and nothing like this. She thought she might like this better. There was something in the plainness of it that felt honest. The ranch came into view as they crested a low hill. Clara saw it whole the way you see a person the first time and get an impression that proves true. A solid barn, a solid house. Good bones in both, but also 5 months of one man trying to do the work of two, while also trying to keep 2 children alive and not always succeeding at either. Laundry stiff and gray on the porch railing. The garden gone to frost and weeds together. A fence post leaning at an angle that said it had been meaning to fall for a while. "It's a good ranch," Clara said. Eli glanced back at her. "It's a mess." "It's a good ranch underneath the mess," she said. "That's harder to come by." He didn't answer, but she saw something in his shoulders, a small settling like a man who has been braced for something that didn't come. Inside was everything she'd expected, and worse, and also somehow not as bad, because underneath the chaos, she could see how it had once been kept. Someone had cared about this house before. The stone fireplace was well built. The kitchen had a good stove and real windowsills. A woman had planted this kitchen, had thought about light and warmth when deciding where things should go. That woman was gone, and the house knew it. "There's a room off the kitchen," Eli said, stopping at the doorway of a small room with a cot and a hook on the wall. "It's nothing much." "It has a door," Clara said. "That's something." "There's a lock on the inside." "Then it's everything I need." He stood there a moment, hat in his hands, turning the brim slowly. He looked up close like a man who had forgotten how to ask for things, who had gone so long making do with what remained that the very act of wanting felt presumptuous. "Miss Whitfield," he said. "Clara," she said. "Please." He nodded once. "Clara. I want to be plain with you." He stopped, started again. "I'm not a man who gives much by way of conversation. I work from sunup. The girls need more than I know how to give them right now. I'm not asking you to fix everything. I just need—" He stopped again. "You need someone to stay," Clara said quietly. He looked at her. "I'll stay, Mr. Hargrove." Ada appeared in the doorway behind her father. She had Nora by the hand. She was looking at Clara with that same measuring look, and Clara met it without flinching, because she had learned that the worst thing you could do with a child who was testing you was look away. "Supper," Ada said. "Nora hasn't eaten since breakfast." "What do you have in the kitchen?" Clara asked. Ada blinked. She had expected Clara guessed to be told to wait, or to be told supper would be soon, or to be told any number of things that would have put the child back in her place. She had not expected to be consulted. "Beans," Ada said after a moment, "and some salt pork. Papa was going to make biscuits, but he forgets the salt." "I never forget the salt," Clara said. "Come show me where things are." Ada held Nora's hand and walked toward the kitchen without enthusiasm, but she walked. Eli Hargrove stood in the hallway watching Clara follow his daughters, and for a moment he did not move at all. Then he put his hat back on and went to see to the horses. In the kitchen, Clara rolled up her sleeves and began. Nora sat on the floor near the stove because it was warm and watched Clara with wide, unblinking eyes, occasionally offering opinions that were not requested and were often incorrect, but were always delivered with great conviction. Ada stood at the counter with her arms crossed, not helping, but not leaving either, watching every movement with the intensity of a child who is memorizing something she doesn't trust but can't quite bring herself to walk away from. "You're measuring wrong," Ada said when Clara was cutting the salt pork. "How's that? Mama measured different." "I reckon she did," Clara said without stopping. "Every cook measures different. What was her name?" Ada went quiet. Clara waited. "Margaret," Ada said at last. Very small. "That's a beautiful name," Clara said. Ada said nothing, but her arms uncrossed just slightly, just enough that the gesture meant something. Nora looked up from the floor. "Mama's in heaven," she said with the matter-of-fact gravity of a 4-year-old reporting weather conditions. "I know, sweetheart," Clara said softly. "Do you think it's warm there?" Clara looked at the little girl. She thought of all the right things she could say, all the careful, appropriate things, and then she discarded them. "I think it's exactly as warm as she'd want it to be," Clara said. Nora seemed to find this satisfying. She went back to examining a crack in the floorboard. When supper was ready, Clara set it on the table and went to the door and called out toward the barn, and after a moment, Eli came in stomping the cold off his boots and stopped when he smelled the food. He stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at the table. "Sit down," Clara said. "It's best hot." He sat. The girls sat. Clara set a plate in front of each of them, and then sat herself, and for a moment nobody spoke, and the silence was the first quiet, full, non-desperate silence this kitchen had held in 5 months. "It's good," Nora said around a mouthful. "Miss Clara, it's really good." Ada ate. She didn't say anything, but halfway through supper, she glanced up at Clara, and then down at her plate, and then she said very quietly, so quietly, Clara almost missed it under the sound of the wind beginning outside. "She would have put rosemary in the beans, Mama. She always put rosemary." "Next time I'll put rosemary," Clara said. Ada looked at her. The measuring look was still there, but something behind it had shifted. Not trust, not yet. Too soon and too hard won for that. But the first distant suggestion that trust might someday be possible if nobody did anything stupid. "I don't know that you'll be here for next time," Ada said. It was said without cruelty. Just plainly the way she said everything, the way a 9-year-old says things when she has learned that plain is safer than hoping. Clara looked back at her steadily. "I'll be here," she said. After supper, while Eli saw to the animals, and Nora was put to bed by Ada with the grim efficiency of a child who has been doing this since June, Clara washed the dishes in the quiet kitchen. She was almost done when she heard footsteps behind her. Eli came in from the cold, hands red from the night air, and stopped at the sight of the clean kitchen, the dishes on the rack, the table wiped down, the pot soaking. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I know. You were hired for the girls. I know that too." Clara set the last dish on the rack. "I need to work. Mr. Hargrove, it's the only thing that keeps me honest." He picked up a towel without being asked and started drying beside her. They stood side by side at the counter, and the stove crackled, and outside the Colorado night pressed cold and vast against the windows. After a while, Eli said, "They liked supper." "Ada told me how her mother made the beans," Clara said. "Next time I'll do it her way." He was quiet for a moment. Ada's been carrying a lot." "I know," Clara said. "I can see it on her." "I don't know how to—" He stopped. "You don't have to know how yet," Clara said. "That's what I'm here for." He didn't answer, but he kept drying. They finished the dishes together, and then he made coffee without asking if she wanted any, and set a cup in front of her without ceremony. And they sat at the clean kitchen table with the fire low and the night quiet, and neither of them spoke for a long time. It was the most comfortable Clara May Whitfield had felt in longer than she could remember. She thought of the boarding house, of Mrs. Holt's satisfied smile, of the man on the train platform who had looked at her and found her wanting. She thought of the letter she had written. "I should tell you plainly, I am a large woman, and of arriving anyway, and of Nora's ribbon, and of Ada's arms, uncrossing half an inch over supper. She thought, I do not know what this is yet. She thought, but it is something. Outside, the Colorado wind came down off the plain and moved through the dark ranch and found no purchase and kept going. Inside, for the first time in 5 months, the house was quiet in a way that was not empty. And Clara May Whitfield, who had been told all her life what she was not, sat in the firelight of a kitchen that needed her and said nothing, and knew that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The first week passed, the way first weeks do when you are new somewhere, slowly in the mornings, when everything is still unfamiliar and your hands don't yet know where things are kept, and quickly in the evenings when the work is done and you sit in the quiet and realize the day is already gone. Clara learned the ranch the way she learned everything, by doing. She learned that the chickens were kept in a leaning coop behind the barn, and that 3 of them had stopped laying because nobody had thought to check whether they had feed. She learned that the garden, though frost-killed on the surface, had good soil underneath that would come back in spring if someone turned it properly. She learned that the wood stove in the kitchen had a trick to its damper that required a specific angle, or it smoked, and that Eli had apparently been tolerating the smoke for 5 months because he hadn't had the patience to figure out the angle, and that when she figured it out on the second morning, he stood in the kitchen doorway and stared at the clean burning stove like a man who had forgotten that things could work correctly. She learned Nora first because Nora was 4, and 4-year-olds do not bother with suspicion. By the second morning, Nora had transferred her trust completely and permanently, following Clara around the kitchen, with a commentary on everything that was thorough, unasked for, and frequently wrong. She had opinions about the correct way to crack an egg. She had opinions about whether the broom was being used correctly. She fell asleep against Clara's arm on the 3rd afternoon and slept there for 2 hours while Clara read, and when she woke up she patted Clara's arm with both hands like she was checking it was still real, and then went back to playing without a word, as though falling asleep against a woman she'd known for 3 days was a perfectly ordinary thing. Ada was different. Ada watched. Ada noticed things and filed them away and gave nothing back until she'd decided what to do with what she'd collected. She was 9 years old, and she had the internal architecture of a much older person rooms inside her that stayed locked doors that only opened when she decided, and a very clear sense of which doors those were. She did not warm to Clara the way Nora did. She did not pull away either. She simply observed, and Clara let herself be observed, because she understood that this was the only right thing to do. On the 4th day, Ada came into the kitchen while Clara was making bread, and stood at the opposite end of the table without being invited or unwelcome. "You're doing it wrong," Ada said. Clara looked at the dough. "How's that?" "You're working it too long. Mama said if you work it too long, it gets tough." "Your mama was right," Clara said. She stopped kneading. "How long did she work it?" Ada hesitated. The hesitation was small, but Clara caught it, the brief internal negotiation of a child deciding whether the information was safe to share. "Until the surface was smooth," Ada said finally. She said you could tell by touching it. She'd press it with one finger, and if it came back slow, she said it was ready. Clara pressed the dough with one finger. It came back slow. "Like that?" Ada looked. "Yeah," she said. "Like that." Clara covered the dough with a cloth and left it. She went to the stove and put the kettle on because the morning was cold, and because doing something with her hands made talking easier. "Did she teach you much cooking?" "Some." Ada pulled out a chair and sat in it, not like she'd decided to stay, but like she'd decided not to leave yet. "She was going to teach me more. She said when I was 10, she'd show me the proper way to make pie crust." She stopped. "She sounded like a good teacher," Clara said. "She was good at most things." Ada looked at the table. "She was better at the ranch stuff than Papa. She could fix the fence posts. Papa can fix them too, but he takes longer and gets mad at the hammer." Clara thought of the leaning fence post she'd seen on arrival. "Your Papa strikes me as a man who holds his frustration quiet," she said. "He doesn't yell," Ada agreed. "He just goes real still. Mama used to say when Eli goes still, you better check what broke. Something moved across Ada's face, fast and then gone, a flash of memory of hearing her mother say those words, of a time when her mother said words. She looked away toward the window. Clara said nothing. She let the silence sit where it needed to sit. After a moment, Ada said, "How long are you actually staying?" "I told you, I'm staying." "You said that, but people say things." "I know they do." Clara turned to face her. "I'm not asking you to believe me yet, Ada. Believing is something you earn the right to ask for. I haven't earned it. But I'm going to keep showing up every morning and doing what I said I'd do, and eventually you'll have enough evidence to make up your own mind." Ada looked at her for a long moment. "That's a strange thing to say. Is it wrong?" Ada thought about it with the particular seriousness she applied to most things. "No," she said at last. "I reckon it's not." The bread rose. Clara baked it. Ada watched the whole process from her chair, without moving and without speaking again. But she stayed until it came out of the oven, and when Clara cut the first slice and put it in front of her without asking, she ate it and said it was good. She said it like she was delivering a verdict, not a compliment. Clara took it as both. It was on the 6th day that Clara understood how deep Ada's wound ran. She had found the older girl in the barn in the early afternoon, crouched beside the oldest of the ranch horses, with a cloth cleaning the animal's foreleg with methodical care. Clara had come to ask if Ada knew where the spare lamp oil was kept. She'd started to speak, and then stopped because Ada was talking. Not to her. Ada didn't know she was there. She was talking to the horse. Her voice was low and even, and entirely different from the voice she used with people. Something had gone out of it. Some bracing, some careful control, and what was underneath was a 9-year-old girl who was very, very tired. "I don't know what to do about Nora," Ada was saying, wiping the cloth in slow circles. "She's too little to understand properly. She says Mama's name like it's just a word, like it's just any word." She paused. The horse blinked at her. "I don't want to forget what Mama sounded like. I've been trying to remember every morning when I wake up, but I can't always. I can't always hear it right. In my head. Her voice." Ada's hand slowed. "I'm scared I'm going to forget." Clara did not move in the doorway. "Papa won't talk about her." Ada continued, quieter now. "I know he's sad. I know it's because he's sad. But I need to. I need someone to talk about her, because otherwise it's like she's already gone all the way, and she wasn't all the way gone. She was still here, and she loved us, and she was real." Her voice broke on the last word. Just a small break, quickly mended, but real. Clara stepped back from the barn door without making a sound. She went back to the house and found the lamp oil herself, and said nothing about what she'd heard, because some things are not yours to speak to until the person who said them decides to speak to you. But she turned it over in her mind all evening, and she thought about Eli going still in the kitchen when she'd mentioned Margaret's name, and she thought about what it meant for two people who loved the same woman to be grieving in complete silence 12 feet from each other. She thought, somebody in this house has to say her name out loud. She thought, I reckon that's going to be me. She found her moment that night after supper, when Nora was on Eli's lap, near the fire, half asleep, and Ada was pretending to read, and Eli was staring at a point on the wall with his particular brand of quiet that meant he was somewhere else entirely. "Ada told me today," Clara said from her chair, keeping her voice conversational and easy, "that your wife used to say you could tell bread dough was ready when it came back slow from the touch." The room shifted. Eli's eyes came back from wherever they'd been. He looked at Clara. Ada looked up from her book. Nora had gone still in Eli's lap, listening with the animal attention of a small child pretending to be asleep. "Margaret always said that," Eli said. His voice was careful, the voice of a man picking his way across uncertain ground. "She was right. It makes a better loaf." Clara looked at Ada. "Did she teach you anything else like that? Those kind of small things?" Ada looked at her father. Something passed between them, a checking, a weighing, a child making sure the door she was about to open was one she was allowed to open. Eli gave the smallest nod. Clara wasn't sure he knew he'd done it. She used to say you could tell if rain was coming by the way the horses stood, Ada said. If they turned their backs to the wind, it was going to be bad. If they just moved away from the fence, it was going to pass. She paused. She was right most of the time. She was right more than most times, Eli said, quietly. The words seemed to cost him something, but he said them. Nora lifted her head from his lap. Mama smelled like lavender, she announced with the authority of someone contributing important evidence. From her pillow. She did, Eli said. His voice had gone rough around the edges. She kept dried lavender in the pillowcase. She said it helped her sleep. Why? Nora asked. She had bad dreams sometimes, Eli said. The lavender helped keep them away. He looked down at his younger daughter, and something in his face opened in a way Clara had not seen it open before, a kind of pain that was also a kind of love, the two so tangled together in him that it was impossible to say where one stopped and the other started. She got that from her grandmother, I think. The lavender. I want lavender in my pillow, Nora said. I'll find some, Clara said. Eli looked at her. It was a brief look, just a moment, but it had something in it she didn't know how to name, yet not gratitude too complex for gratitude, more like recognition. Like a man noticing for the first time that someone has been holding a door open for him. Ada put her book down entirely. She used to sing when she braided our hair, she said. She was looking at the fire now, not at anyone. The same song every time, about the river. She didn't say the song, but she said, I keep trying to remember the words, and I can only remember the tune. Then hum it, Clara said. You don't need the words. Ada looked at her. Seriously, Clara said. Hum it. The words will come back or they won't, but the tune is hers, and it's yours, and you're allowed to have it. Ada looked at the fire again, and then, very quietly, she hummed. 4 bars, maybe 5. A simple old melody that Clara didn't recognize, something that sounded like it had come from a long way back and a long way away. When she stopped, the room was quiet. Nora had sat up fully in Eli's lap. I remember that, she said in a small voice. Yeah, Ada said. Me too. Eli had his hand over his eyes. Just sitting there with his hand over his eyes, not making a sound. Clara looked at him, and did not look away, and did not pretend she hadn't seen it, because looking away from a man's grief was its own kind of cruelty. After a while, he lowered his hand. His face was composed again, mostly. Thank you, he said. He said it to the room in general. He meant it for Clara. She understood that. She sounds like she was a fine woman, Clara said. From everything Ada tells me. She was the finest I ever knew, Eli said. He said it plainly without apology or embellishment, the way a man states a fact he's made peace with. Then he looked at Clara and said just as plainly, she would have liked you. Clara felt the words land somewhere deep and quiet in her chest. You can't know that, she said. I know what she liked, he said. She liked capable people. She liked people who showed up and did the work without making a performance of it. He looked at his daughters, one asleep now and one almost. She liked people who paid attention to her children. Clara looked at the fire. Her throat was doing something she didn't want it to do. I'm going to put Nora to bed, Ada said. She lifted her sister from her father's lap with the practiced ease of a child who had done this more nights than she should have had to, and carried her toward the stairs. At the foot of the stairs, she stopped. She didn't turn around. Miss Clara, she said. Yes. The bread today was good. Even though you stopped kneading early, it wasn't too tough. High praise, Clara said. It was just an observation, Ada said, and went upstairs. Eli made a sound that was almost a laugh. Almost. The closest thing to one Clara had heard from him. They sat for a while after the children were in bed, the way they had the first night, in the comfortable silence that had developed between them without either of them planning it. It was the silence of two people who did not need to fill space with words, who had each spent enough time alone to know the difference between silence that was empty and silence that was full. She closed herself off after Margaret died. Eli said after a while, Ada just shut down, started taking care of everything herself, wouldn't ask for anything, wouldn't admit to anything. She's scared to need someone, Clara said, because needing someone means they can leave. He was quiet. She's not closed, Mr. Hargrove, Clara said. She's careful, there's a difference. Closed means there's nothing left in there. Careful means there's something worth protecting. Eli looked at her. How do you know that? Because she told a horse about it, Clara said. He didn't ask how she knew. He seemed to understand that some things are found without being looked for. She'll let you in, Clara said. In her own time, on her own terms. She just needs to see enough to decide it's worth the risk. And if she decides it's not, then she decides. But I don't think she will. Clara set down her cup. She hummed that song. Eli looked at the fire. She hasn't sung or hummed anything since June, he said. She hummed it tonight. He was quiet for a long time. Outside, the wind moved through the dark ranch and the fire settled, and the house breathed around them the way houses do when they're holding people they're getting used to. I didn't think... Eli started, stopped, tried again. When I put that notice up, I was just trying to keep them from falling apart completely. I wasn't thinking about... He stopped again. About what? Clara asked. He looked at her. In the firelight, his face was less guarded than she had yet seen it. The exhaustion showing through the composure, and underneath the exhaustion, something that was not yet anything with a name, but was at least beginning to be aware of itself. Nothing, he said. It doesn't matter yet. Clara looked at him, and let it be because she had learned when to push and when to let a door stay where it was. Get some sleep, Mr. Hargrove, she said, and stood and carried her cup to the kitchen. She was washing it when she heard his boots on the floor, heard him pause in the kitchen doorway behind her. Clara, he said. She turned. He looked at her for a moment with that same expression. She couldn't name the one that had started. She thought to come a little clearer, like a shape emerging from morning fog. Then he simply said, "Good night," and turned and went down the hall. Clara stood alone in the clean kitchen and listened to the sounds of the ranch settling into the deep cold of the night. The stove ticked. The wind moved outside. Somewhere upstairs, Ada was probably lying awake in the way that careful children lie awake, listening to the silence and deciding what she thought about it. Clara dried her cup and put it on the shelf. She thought, this is a house that knows how to love. It's just forgotten for a while how to let itself. She went to her room and locked the door from the inside, and lay down on the narrow cot and looked at the dark ceiling. She thought about Ada humming those 5 bars into the firelit room. She thought about Nora announcing that her mother smelled like lavender with the certainty of someone presenting evidence in a court of law. She thought about Eli's hand over his eyes. She thought, I have been in this house 1 week. She thought, I am not leaving. 3 weeks passed, and the ranch began to remember what it was supposed to be. It happened in small ways first. The chickens had feed and were laying again. The wood stove no longer smoked. The fence post that had been leaning since August stood straight because Clara had spent a Saturday afternoon with a post hole digger, and Eli had come out of the barn to find her halfway done and taken over without a word, the two of them working the rest of it in the easy silence they had gotten good at. The garden was put to bed properly for winter. The soil turned and rested waiting. The laundry came in off the porch and got folded and put away instead of living in a gray heap that everyone walked past and pretended not to see. Nora had started calling Clara by a name that was not her name. It had happened on a Tuesday without ceremony or announcement. Clara had been braiding Nora's hair before school. Ada had shown her the way. Margaret used to do it, a simple plait, with the ribbon worked in near the bottom, and Nora had looked up at her in the mirror, propped against the kitchen windowsill, and said, "Mama, Clara, is it too tight?" Clara's hands had stopped. "Nora, sweetheart," she'd said carefully. "You can call me Miss Clara." Nora had blinked. "I know, but you're braiding my hair." As though that settled the matter entirely. Clara had looked at herself in the mirror, and then at the small face looking back at her, and had made a decision in the space of a breath not to make an issue of what was not an issue to a 4-year-old. She'd finished the braid, she'd tied the ribbon, she'd said, "There, not too tight." And Nora had hopped off the chair and gone for her coat, and that had been that. Eli had been in the doorway. She hadn't realized until she turned around. He was looking at her with the expression that had been coming clearer by the week. The one she still didn't have a name for, but that she had begun to recognize the shape of the way you recognize a word in a language you're still learning, not fully, not precisely, but enough to know the general territory. "She does that," he said. "Makes up her mind about things and doesn't revisit." "She's decisive," Clara said. "That'll serve her well." "Her mother was the same way," he said. And then more quietly, "So are you." Clara picked up her coffee cup and didn't answer, because there was nothing to answer that wouldn't lead somewhere she wasn't sure either of them was ready to go yet. Eli seemed to understand this because he put his hat on and went to the barn, and neither of them brought it up again. Ada, for her part, had not called Clara anything other than Miss Clara, but she had stopped testing the exits. That was how Clara thought of it, testing the exits. The constant low-level checking that Ada had done in the first 2 weeks, the way she'd angle her questions to find the places where Clara might falter or flinch or reveal some hidden impatience. The questions weren't obvious. Ada was too smart for obvious. They came sideways, embedded in ordinary conversation. "Does it bother you when Nora asks the same thing 7 times? What do you do when you're angry and there's nobody to be angry at? Would you rather be somewhere else in the winter?" Clara had answered all of them honestly, which she suspected was why Ada had gradually, incrementally, almost invisibly stopped asking them. What Ada had started doing instead was talking about Margaret. Not constantly, not in a way that felt like grief on display, but naturally the way you mention a person who is part of your daily thinking. Mama used to keep the extra blankets in the chest at the top of the stairs. Mama didn't like the smell of wood smoke on her clothes she always changed before supper. Mama could tell which hen was going to stop laying just by looking at it, and she was right every single time. Clara received every one of these offerings the same way, with attention, without comment that would make it feel significant, because the moment you made a child feel significant for sharing something vulnerable, they'd stop sharing it. She just listened and remembered, and occasionally asked a follow-up question that showed she'd been listening. Over time, Ada had begun offering more. It was on a Saturday, 3 weeks and 2 days after Clara's arrival, that Ada knocked on Clara's door before bed. Clara was mending a tear in her spare dress by lamplight. She called, "Come in," and Ada came in and stood in the doorway in her nightgown, which was too short at the ankle because she'd grown 2 inches since spring, and nobody had had time to notice. "I need to tell you something," Ada said. "All right," Clara said, and put the mending down. Ada came in and sat on the edge of the cot with the straight-backed posture she carried everywhere. She put her hands in her lap. She looked at them. "Last night, I couldn't remember Mama's face," she said. "I was trying to go to sleep, and I was trying to picture her, and I couldn't get it right. The parts were all there, but they weren't in the right order." She stopped. "I know that sounds strange." "It doesn't sound strange at all," Clara said. "It scared me." Ada said it flat and even, the way she said things that cost her. I thought if I can't see her face anymore, then she's really gone. All the way gone." Clara set the mending completely aside and turned to face Ada on the cot. "Can I tell you something?" she said. Ada nodded barely. "Forgetting the face doesn't mean forgetting the person. The face is just the outside of someone. You haven't forgotten your mama. You just told me 4 things about her this week alone. The blankets, the wood smoke, the hens, the lavender. That's not forgetting. That's carrying. Ada looked up. The face will come back, Clara said. And even if it gets harder to find sometimes the things that made her who she was, those are in you, Ada. You braid Nora's hair the way she showed you. You check the horses when the wind shifts. You make your decisions, and you don't revisit them. Clara paused. That's not nothing. That's your mother living in the way you move through the world. Ada looked at her for a long moment. Her chin was doing the thing it did when she was fighting something back. I'm scared all the time, Ada said. It came out barely above a whisper. I don't show it because Nora needs me to not be scared, and Papa's got enough. But I'm scared all the time that something else is going to happen, that someone else is going to leave. I know, Clara said quietly. You don't know if you're going to leave, Ada said. Not accusatory, just factual. That's true, Clara said. I can't promise you what the future holds. Nobody can do that, and anybody who does is lying to you. What I can tell you is that I have not once woken up in the morning and wanted to be anywhere other than here. She held Ada's gaze. Not once. Not even on the mornings when the stove won't cooperate, and Nora has decided breakfast is the enemy. And your father is so deep in his own head, I might as well be talking to the barn wall. Not even then. Something broke open in Ada's face. Just a little. Just enough. She leaned forward and put her head against Clara's shoulder the way a child does when they've run out of the energy required to hold themselves upright and apart, and Clara put her arm around her and held her there, and Ada cried quietly for a while, not the elaborate grief of someone performing sorrow, but the small, exhausted weeping of a 9-year-old who had been standing guard for 5 months and needed just for a few minutes to let someone else stand it for her. Let me be strong tonight, Clara said into Ada's hair. You can have it back in the morning. Ada didn't say anything, but she stayed. The trouble came on a Wednesday. Clara had been in town for supplies the first time she'd made the trip alone, Eli having left her the wagon and a short list, and gone to fix the north pasture fence. Calhoun Flats was small enough that strangers were noticed and talked about, and filed into one of 2 categories, people who belonged and people who did not, and Clara had understood from her first trip into town with Eli and the girls that she had been filed under the 2nd category and would remain there until further notice. She was coming out of the dry goods store with a crate of supplies when she nearly walked into Mrs. Alderton. Mrs. Alderton was the wife of the town's most prominent banker and operated the social architecture of Calhoun Flats with the efficiency and precision of someone who considered it a profession. She was thin and neatly dressed, and had the particular quality of a woman who has never once doubted that her opinion is not only correct, but owed. She looked at Clara. Her eyes moved over her the way they would move over a ledger entry that didn't add up. You're the woman out at the Hargrove place, she said. It was not a question. Clara Whitfield. Clara, Clara said. Good morning, ma'am. You've been there nearly a month. I have. Mrs. Alderton's gaze moved to the crate in Clara's arms, then back up to her face. The whole town is talking about it, you know. An unmarried woman living out on a widower's ranch. I'm aware that people talk, Clara said. She kept her voice even, and her hands steady on the crate. It isn't decent, Mrs. Alderton said. Whatever your arrangement is, however you might frame it, a woman in your position living under a man's roof without the sanction of marriage is not something this community looks kindly on. Those are impressionable children. Those children, Clara said quietly, were not sleeping, not eating, and not speaking when I arrived. I imagine the community's concern for their impressionable natures might have been more usefully applied 5 months ago. Mrs. Alderton's expression sharpened. You have a bold tongue for a woman in your circumstances. I have an honest one, Clara said. I find they're sometimes the same thing. She stepped around the woman. Good day, Mrs. Alderton. She loaded the crate into the wagon and drove back to the ranch with her jaw set and her hands too tight on the reins, and did not mention it to Eli when he came in for supper. But the town she was learning did not need her to mention things. The town made its own arrangements. 3 days later, a Sunday, Clara and Eli took the girls to church, because Ada had asked to go, because Margaret had taken them every Sunday without exception, and Ada was trying to keep the things that Margaret had kept. The church was a plain building at the center of Calhoun Flats, with a congregation that managed to be both welcoming and watchful in the way that small-town congregations are: warmth and surveillance, wrapped together so tightly you couldn't get one without the other. The preacher's sermon was about propriety. Clara did not think it was directed at her specifically. She thought it was directed at her specifically. Afterward, on the steps, the school teacher, Miss Priscilla Holt, came forward and took Clara's hand with genuine warmth. She was a small, sharp-eyed woman of about 40, who seemed to have made a private decision long ago to say what she thought and live with the consequences. "Ada is doing remarkable work," she said. "She's reading above her grade, and her arithmetic has improved considerably. She seems—" Miss Holt paused, choosing carefully, "lighter. There's a lightness in her this term that wasn't there in September." "She's a very bright girl," Clara said. "She is, and she speaks well of you." Miss Holt said it with the directness of someone delivering useful intelligence. "I want you to know that. Not everyone in this town is Mrs. Alderton." Before Clara could respond, a hand came down on Eli's arm. It was Deacon Burwell, a thick-set man with a careful face, and the slow, measured voice of someone who had learned that saying things unhurriedly made them sound more considered than they were. He was the head of the church board, and the man who had filed the original deed on the school grounds, and considered both facts to be roughly equivalent in terms of moral authority granted. "Hargrove," he said. "A word." Eli turned. Clara made to step back, and Eli's hand came briefly to her elbow, not pulling, not possessive, just a small, steady pressure that said, "Stay," and she stayed. Deacon Burwell looked at Clara with the particular expression of a man who is about to say something he's framed as concern but means as warning. "The nature of your domestic arrangement has come before the church board," he said. "We've discussed it at some length." "Have you?" Eli said. His voice had gone flat and careful. "A man and an unmarried woman living under one roof. The community has a right to set standards for the moral environment its children are raised in. My children are fed and healthy and sleeping through the night for the first time since June," Eli said. "I'm not sure that's the community's business." "Everything that happens in this town is the community's business," Burwell said. He looked at Clara. "Miss Whitfield, I don't doubt you mean well, but meaning well and being appropriate are two different matters. You'd do well to consider that your presence in that house puts those little girls at risk, not from anything you've done, from what people say about what you've done." Clara looked at him steadily. "And what do people say, Deacon?" He had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. "People say it isn't right. A woman of your—" He paused, and she knew what was inside the pause, all of it, her size and her singleness and her showing up on a platform with a carpet bag and no one to vouch for her. "Your situation. Caring for another man's children." "My situation," Clara said. "I mean no offense." "I know exactly what you mean," Clara said. The calm in her voice surprised even her. "You mean that I am a large woman with no husband and no family name that means anything in this county, and that because of those things, I am not the kind of woman this community imagines when it imagines someone worthy of those children's care." She held his gaze. "And I am telling you, Deacon, that those children do not need the community's imagination. They need clean clothes and warm food, and someone to sit with them when they're scared in the night. I provide those things. I will continue to provide those things." Burwell looked at Eli. "I'm telling you this as a friend. The board is prepared to make a formal complaint to the county magistrate if the situation is not resolved." He put his hat on. "Good day, Hargrove. Miss Whitfield." He walked away. The church steps were quietly busy around them, people talking and not quite looking and very much listening. Eli's hand was still at Clara's elbow. When Burwell was gone, he let it drop, and for a moment he just stood there with his jaw set and his eyes on the middle distance. "We should get the girls home," Clara said. "Clara?" "Not here," she said quietly. They drove back in silence, Nora asleep on Clara's lap, before they'd cleared the edge of town. Ada sitting up front with her father, reading the quality of the air between the two adults with the precision she applied to everything, not asking questions because she'd learned enough to know that the answers would come or they wouldn't, and asking didn't change which. That evening, after the girls were in bed, Eli came into the kitchen where Clara was sitting at the table with her hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee she'd forgotten to drink. He sat down across from her. He put his elbows on the table and looked at her straight. "They'll go to the magistrate," he said. "Burwell does what he says he'll do. I've known him 20 years. "I know," Clara said. "If the magistrate gets involved—" "I know what happens," Clara said. "I'm not a fool, Eli." He was quiet for a moment. "I could talk to the magistrate first, explain the situation." "You could," Clara said. "And he'd listen politely and write down what you said and rule according to what Burwell and Alderton and the rest of them have already decided, because that's how it works in a town this size, and you know it as well as I do." Eli looked at his hands. "There's another way to resolve it," he said. Clara looked at him. She knew what he was going to say before he said it. She had known it was coming, the way you know weather is coming. Not the exact shape of it, but the pressure in the air that tells you something is about to change. "I could ask you to marry me," Eli said. He said it carefully, like a man laying something fragile on a table, watching to see if the surface holds. "That would satisfy the board, the magistrate, all of them." Clara looked at him for a long time. "You could," she said. "I'm not saying it right," he said. He rubbed the back of his neck. I don't want you to think I'm asking because of Burwell. He stopped, started again. "I've been thinking about it before Burwell said a word. I want to be clear about that." "Eli." He looked at her. "Before you say anything else," Clara said carefully, "I want you to be sure that what you're feeling isn't just gratitude for what I've done with the girls. Because gratitude is real, and it matters, but it isn't the same thing, and I won't—" She stopped. "I won't be a solution to a problem, not again." Something moved in his face. "What do you mean, not again?" She hadn't meant to say that last part. She looked at the table. "There was a man," she said, "before. He advertised for a capable woman, someone to help run a ranch, keep house, manage things. I answered." She paused. "I thought it was more than it was. I was wrong. I don't—" She stopped again. "I don't want to be wrong again." Eli was quiet for a while. The stove ticked. Outside, the Colorado night pressed close. "I'm not him," Eli said. "I know you're not. And I'm not asking you because you're capable, though God knows you are." He leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table, his dark eyes steady on hers. "I'm asking you because this house has been dead for 5 months, and you walked into it, and it started breathing again. I'm asking you because my daughters who were turning into small ghosts, have started being children again. I'm asking you because I sit in this kitchen every night, and the quiet is—" He stopped. "The quiet with you in it is the first quiet that hasn't felt like an absence in a long time." Clara's throat was doing the thing it did. "And I know it's not the right time," he said. "And I know you came here for the girls and not for this. And I know you've been told things about yourself that weren't true, and that those things are still in you somewhere." He held her gaze. "But I'm asking you anyway, because I think you deserve to be asked right, and not by a man who looks at you and sees a problem to be solved." Clara looked at him for a long time. The lamplight was low. The house was quiet around them, the particular quiet of 2 sleeping children, and a cold night, and a decision sitting in the middle of a kitchen table, waiting to be picked up. "Eli," she said. "You don't have to answer tonight," he said. "I know," she said, "but I mean it." "I know that too," she said quietly. She stood and carried her cold coffee to the sink and stood there a moment with her back to him, looking at the dark window. She thought, "He means it." She thought, "That's the most terrifying thing I have heard in 32 years. She turned around. Eli was still at the table watching her with the patient, undemanding attention that had been from the very first day one of the things about him she hadn't expected and hadn't known what to do with. "Good night, Eli," she said. "Good night, Clara," he said. She went to her room and locked the door and lay down on the narrow cot and looked at the dark ceiling and listened to the sound of the house settling around her, the children asleep above the fire going low, the wind outside moving through the dark Colorado plain. She lay there a long time. She did not sleep. She gave him her answer 3 days later, and it was not the answer he was expecting. It was early morning, the kind of cold that gets into the house through the gaps in the window frames and sits on the floor like something alive. Clara had been up since before dawn the way she always was, the wood stove going, and coffee on, and biscuits in the pan. And when Eli came in from the first barn check, his breath was a cloud in the doorway, and he stood there stamping cold off his boots and looked at her the way he'd been looking at her for 3 days carefully. From a slight distance, the look of a man who has put something out into the open and is now waiting to see how the weather treats it. Clara set a cup of coffee in front of his chair. "I've been thinking about what you said," she said. He sat down, wrapped his hands around the cup. "All right. I've been thinking about it for 3 days, and I've thought about it from every direction I know how to think about something." She sat down across from him. Her hands were flat on the table, a habit she had when she was saying something she needed to say straight. "And I've decided that my answer is no." Eli looked at her. "Not because I don't—" She stopped, started again. "Not because what you said wasn't real, or because I don't believe you meant it. I think you meant every word." She held his gaze. "But Eli, you asked me 3 days after Burwell made his threat. And whatever you say about thinking about it before, and I believe you, whatever you say about that, if I say yes now, I will spend the rest of my life wondering if the yes came from the right place. If it was me you were choosing, or the situation you were solving." Eli was quiet. "And I won't do that," Clara said. "I won't do that to you, and I won't do it to myself, and I especially won't do it to those girls upstairs who need to see what a real choice looks like." The biscuits were ready. She got up and took them out of the pan and put them on the table between them and sat back down. The kitchen was warm. Outside, the wind had not yet started. "So that's your answer," Eli said. His voice was even impossible to read. "That's half of it," Clara said. He looked at her. "The other half is that I'm not leaving," she said. "I told Ada I would stay, and I told Nora and I told you, and I don't break what I say. Burwell can go to the magistrate. Let him. Let the whole county come and look at this house and these children and tell me what they see that's wrong with it." She met his eyes. "But I won't marry you as a solution, Eli. If you ask me again someday, and you can ask me again, I'm not closing the door. It has to be when there's no threat, and no board, and no deacon standing behind the question pushing it forward." Eli looked at her for a long time. Something in his face had shifted. Not hurt, not quite, but a rearranging. A man sorting through what he'd heard and deciding where to put it. "You're the most stubborn woman I have ever met," he said. "I've been told that," Clara said. "It's usually not meant as a compliment." "I'm not sure how I mean it yet," he said. But the corner of his mouth had moved just slightly in a way she had begun to recognize as the closest thing Eli Hargrove had to a smile before he was ready to commit to one. He reached over and took a biscuit. "All right," he said. "All right. All right, Clara. We'll do it your way." She exhaled something she hadn't known she was holding. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," he said. "I still think Burwell's going to be a problem." "I know he is," she said. "But some problems you face, and some you solve, and some you just outlast. I've gotten good at outlasting." The magistrate's letter arrived on a Friday. Eli brought it in from the post and set it on the kitchen table without opening it. And they both looked at it for a moment, the way you look at something you knew was coming and still find yourself unprepared for. Ada appeared in the kitchen doorway and looked at the letter, and then at her father, and then at Clara. "Is that bad?" she asked. "It's a letter," Clara said. "Letters are just paper until you read them." Eli opened it. He read it twice. Then he set it down and said, "The magistrate has agreed to hear Burwell's formal complaint. There will be a public meeting. 2 weeks." "What kind of meeting?" Ada asked. "The kind where the town decides things," Eli said carefully. Ada looked at Clara. Her chin was up in that particular way. She had not defiant, not quite, but the posture of someone bracing for impact and refusing to let the impact see her brace. "Are they going to make you leave?" she asked. Clara looked at the letter on the table. "They're going to try," she said. Ada was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'll tell them, at the meeting. I'll go, and I'll tell them what it was like before, and what it's like now, and anyone who says you should leave can argue with me about it." Ada. "I'm not asking permission," Ada said. Her voice was steady and completely serious. "I know what I saw. I know what it was. And I know what it is now, and if the town wants to say that's wrong, then they can say it to my face." Clara stood up and crossed the kitchen and crouched down in front of her. The bad knee again. It always complained so that she was level with Ada's face. "You are," she said quietly, "one of the finest people I have ever had the privilege of knowing." Ada looked at her. Her chin wobbled once very slightly. "I'm just telling the truth," she said. "That's all the finest people ever do," Clara said. The 2 weeks before the meeting were the longest of Clara's recent memory, and the strangest because the threat was real and present, and she could feel it, the way the women at church moved around her, the looks in the dry goods store, the conversation that stopped when she came near. And yet inside the ranch house, things were more settled and more steady than they had ever been, as though the external pressure had done the opposite of what it was intended to do, had instead made clear to everyone under that roof exactly what they had and what they stood to lose. Nora remained entirely unaffected by the social temperature, as 4-year-olds tend to be, and continued to call Clara Mama. Clara without reservation, and to regard the whole enterprise of the outside world as largely irrelevant to the important business of daily life, which consisted primarily of the chickens the state of her ribbon, and whether supper would include the cornbread she liked. Ada had become in some indefinable way more present, less like a child managing a household, and more like a child who had been given permission to inhabit her own life. She did her schoolwork at the kitchen table with Clara nearby, and she asked questions now about what Clara read about, where she'd grown up, about Ohio, and what it looked like compared to Colorado, with the genuine curiosity of someone who had decided that knowing another person was worth the vulnerability it required. And Eli. Eli was different in a way Clara noticed, but didn't name, because naming it felt premature, like calling something a beginning when you weren't yet certain it wasn't still a middle. He talked more. Not dramatically more, not in a way that would have struck a stranger as remarkable, but Clara knew the calibration of his silences well enough now to measure the difference. He talked about the ranch plans for the spring, the north pasture, a roof repair that had been waiting since August. He talked about the girl's small things he'd noticed, moments he'd stored. He talked once carefully about Margaret, about how she'd come to Colorado from Missouri at 19, and had been afraid of almost nothing, and had learned to handle a rifle before she'd learned to make pie crust, and had laughed at herself for it. She wasn't afraid, Clara asked. Of very little, Eli said. She was afraid of losing the girls, of something happening to them when she wasn't there to prevent it. He was quiet for a moment. She used to say the only thing she asked of God was enough time to see them grown. Clara didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. She got 5 months short of Ada's 9th birthday, Eli said. Then he picked up his coffee and didn't say anything else about it, and Clara sat with him in the quiet that followed, and let it be what it was. 3 days before the meeting, Miss Priscilla Holt appeared at the ranch door. Clara opened it and found the schoolteacher standing on the porch with her coat buttoned to the chin and an expression of determined practicality. "I wanted to come in person," Miss Holt said. "I'll speak at the meeting. On your behalf. I want you to know that before it happens." "Miss Holt, you don't have to do that. It could cause you difficulty with the board." "The board," Miss Holt said precisely, "does not determine what I know to be true." Ada Hargrove came to school in September, unable to concentrate for a full hour. She was pale and distracted, and spent her recesses sitting alone. The child I have in my classroom now is unrecognizable by comparison. She met Clara's eyes. "I will not sit in that meeting and say nothing while they use those children as a pretext for their own discomfort with you." Clara looked at her. "Their discomfort with me," she said. "You mean?" "I mean, you are a woman who does not fit the shape they've decided women should fit," Miss Holt said plainly. "And some people find that more threatening than they can reasonably account for. So they dress it up in language about propriety and morality, because that's more acceptable than admitting that what truly bothers them is that you exist comfortably in a space they told you that you couldn't occupy." She adjusted her collar. "I have had some experience with that particular variety of opposition." Clara was quiet for a moment. "Thank you, Miss Holt." "Priscilla," the woman said. "Given the circumstances, I think we've earned first names." That evening, old Mr. Garrett from the neighboring ranch rode by and left a note tied to the gate post without knocking on the door. Eli found it at the last barn check and brought it in. It was brief and direct, in the way of old men who have stopped worrying about softening things. Hargrove. "Those children look better than they have all year. I'll be at the meeting. I'll say what I see. Garrett." Eli set the note on the table. He looked at it. "Garrett hasn't spoken at a town meeting in 6 years, he said. He said after the water rights dispute of '73, he was done with public gatherings." "He's making an exception," Clara said. "He is." Eli looked at her. "People are watching, Clara. Not just the ones who want to make trouble, the ones who are waiting to see which way the thing goes." "I know," she said. "If the meeting goes wrong?" "I know what happens if it goes wrong, Eli. I've thought about it every night for 2 weeks. She looked at him steadily. "I've decided I'm going to go in there and say what's true, and let it be enough or not enough on its own merits. I'm not going to manage it, or perform it, or make myself smaller to make them more comfortable." She paused. "I've spent enough of my life making myself smaller." Something moved in his face. "You're not small," he said. "You've never been small. Not for one day since you stepped off that train." The morning of the meeting arrived gray and cold. Clara dressed carefully. Her better dress, the one she'd mended 3 weeks back, dark green wool, with the cuffs she'd let down an inch, because she'd always felt the sleeves too short. She braided her hair the way her mother had shown her, neat and plain. She looked at herself in the small mirror in her room, and she looked back at herself without flinching, which was the best she'd ever been able to do, and which she had decided sometime in the last 6 weeks was enough. Ada knocked on her door. She came in already dressed in her Sunday clothes, hair braided ribbon straight. "I'm ready," Ada said. "Ada, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to," Ada said with the particular precision she reserved for this conversation topic, which she had apparently decided was closed to further argument. "I want to. There's a difference." Nora appeared behind her sister in a dress with a crooked sash because she'd tied it herself and refused help. "I want to go too," she announced. "This is grown-up business, Nor," Ada said. "I'm very mature," Nora said. Clara looked at the 4-year-old with the crooked sash and felt something in her chest that was either grief or joy, and was probably both. "You are," she said. "But it's cold, and it'll be long and boring. Mrs. Garrett said she'd sit with you." Nora considered this with great seriousness. Will she have cookies? I'll make sure of it, Clara said. The church was full. Clara had not expected it to be that full. Calhoun Flats was not a large town, but it had packed itself into that building with the thoroughness of people who have correctly identified that something significant is about to happen and do not intend to miss it. Deacon Burwell sat in the front with the church board. Magistrate Greer, a lean man in his 50s who had the careful face of someone who had learned to reserve judgment until the last possible moment, sat at a table facing the congregation. Clara walked in with Eli on one side and Ada on the other, and she felt every eye in that room find her, and she kept walking. They sat. Ada sat with her spine straight and her chin at its accustomed angle, and she looked around the room without apology and without aggression, just looking, making account of what she found. Magistrate Greer called the meeting to order. Burwell presented his case with the slow, measured gravity he applied to everything. An unmarried woman of no established standing in the community, living under a widower's roof, acting in a parental capacity without legal sanction. The community's right to set standards for the moral environment of its children. He made it sound reasonable. He was good at that. When he finished, the magistrate asked if anyone wished to speak. Miss Holt stood first. She said what she had told Clara she would say, and she said it clearly and without apology, and sat down. Mr. Garrett stood, and in the voice of a man who has stopped worrying about what people think, he said, "I've been ranching next to Eli Hargrove for 15 years. Those girls were going gray in June. I can see them from my fence line when the wind's right. They're not gray anymore." He sat down. Two more people spoke: the woman from the dry goods store who had watched Clara loading supplies for 6 weeks and had drawn her own conclusions, and the blacksmith's wife who had noticed that Ada no longer looked like she was carrying something too heavy for her frame. Then Ada stood up. Eli made a motion to stop her. Clara put her hand briefly on his arm. Ada walked to the front of the church. She was 9 years old, and her dress was pressed, and her ribbon was straight, and she faced the room the way Clara had seen her face, everything straight on, no adjustments made for what the audience might prefer. "My mama died in June," Ada said. Her voice was clear and carried. "And after she died, my papa tried his hardest. But he was sad, and I was sad, and Nora was too little to understand what had happened. And the house it was like a house that had forgotten what it was for." She paused. 5 women came and left before Miss Clara. 5. I stopped trying to remember their names because it seemed like extra work for nothing. Someone in the back of the church made a sound, not unkind. "When Miss Clara came," Ada continued, "I told her the last woman lasted 9 days. I told her because I wanted her to know I wasn't going to believe in her. I didn't have any left." She stopped, swallowed. "She told me I didn't have to. She said she'd just keep showing up and I could make up my mind when I had enough evidence." Ada looked at the magistrate. "I have enough evidence now. She taught me that my mama's voice staying in my memory doesn't make me weak. She sat with me at night when I couldn't sleep. She learned how my mama made the beans so she could make them the same way." A pause. She stayed. The church was completely quiet. "You can talk about propriety," Ada said, and she looked directly at Burwell when she said it. "But I don't know what's proper about taking away the only person who's made my sister laugh since June. I don't know what's moral about making my father's house go quiet again." She stood her ground in the silence that followed. "That's all I have to say." She walked back to her seat. She sat down beside Clara and looked straight ahead, and Clara did not trust herself to speak, so she simply put her hand over Ada's and held it, and Ada turned her hand over and held back. Magistrate Greer looked at the room. He looked at Clara. "Miss Whitfield," he said, "do you wish to speak?" Clara stood. She thought about all the things she had prepared, the careful words, the ordered arguments. Then she set them down. "2 years ago," she said, "a man told me I wasn't fit for any man. He said it on a train platform in front of a crowd, and he meant it to finish me, and the truth is, it nearly did." She looked at Burwell, then at the magistrate, then at the room. I have spent 2 years believing that what he said was the verdict on my life. That because no man had chosen me, because I was too much of everything. The wrong things, I had nothing of value to offer anyone. The church was still. Those children didn't choose me because I was small or pretty or what this town thinks a woman ought to look like, Clara said. Nora held out her hair ribbon on a train platform and asked if I could tie it. Ada told me the last woman lasted 9 days and dared me to prove her wrong. That's how it started. She paused. They saw me. Not what I look like. Me. And I would walk through anything this board or this magistrate or this community puts in front of me before I let anyone tell me that what we have built in that house is something to be ashamed of. The silence held. Then from somewhere in the middle of the church, a woman Clara didn't know stood up and said simply, "I've heard enough. Let her stay." And the room moved, not all of it, not unanimously. Nothing in life is that clean, but enough of it audibly and visibly enough that Magistrate Greer looked at Burwell, and Burwell looked at the room. And something in the deacon's careful face acknowledged finally the arithmetic. Greer cleared his throat. "The complaint," he said, "does not present sufficient cause for intervention in the welfare of these children, who by all accounts are thriving." He looked at Burwell. "The board is advised to consider whether its concern is genuinely for the children or for something else entirely." He gathered his papers. "This matter is closed." The church began to murmur and shift, and Eli's hand came to the small of Clara's back. Not possessive, not performed just there, just present, and she felt it the way you feel solid ground after a long time on uncertain terrain. Ada looked up at Clara. Her eyes were bright, and her chin was steady, and she said very quietly, as though it was something she'd been keeping for a while, "I told you." "You did," Clara said. "I had enough evidence," Ada said. "You did," Clara said again. Her voice was not entirely reliable. Eli leaned down slightly. "Are you all right?" he said quietly. "Yes," Clara said. And then, because she owed him honesty, "No, I'm not quite. But I will be." "I know," he said. "I'll be there while you get there." She looked at him. In the light and noise of the church surrounded by the town of Calhoun Flats, deciding what it thought and what it would say next, she looked at this man who had waited, who had not pushed, who had stood behind her and beside her, and never once in front of her, unless she'd needed it. She thought, the right question at the right time is different from the same question asked wrong. She thought, I know the difference now. She did not say anything yet. Some things you carry a little longer before you set them down, not because they're heavy, but because you want to be sure, when you finally let go, that you're letting go in the right place. But she held his gaze for a moment before she looked away, and what was in hers, when she did, she let him see it clearly. His jaw moved once. He nodded, just slightly, just enough. He understood. Outside, the November wind came down off the Colorado plain and moved through the town of Calhoun Flats and rattled the church door and kept going. Inside, Clara May Whitfield stood in a room that had tried to make her small and found it could not, and she stood the full size of herself, and it was enough. They drove home from the meeting in the last light of the afternoon, and nobody spoke for a while, and the silence was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of people who have been through something together and are still inside it, still feeling the shape of it, not yet ready to put it into words. Ada sat between Clara and Eli on the wagon bench. At some point, without making any announcement about it, she had leaned her head against Clara's arm. Clara felt the weight of it and did not move. Nora was at the Garrett place and needed collecting, and when they pulled up to the neighboring ranch, she came running out before the wagon had fully stopped, ribbon half undone again. Crumbs of something on her coat. Mrs. Garrett waving from the porch with an expression of benevolent relief. She talked the entire time, Mrs. Garrett called out. Every topic known to man, and several I believe she invented. That sounds right, Clara called back. Nora scrambled up into the wagon and inserted herself onto Clara's lap without ceremony, turned around to look at her face with the forensic attention she applied to anything she considered important, and announced, "Your eyes are red." "I've had a long day," Clara said. "Did people be mean?" "Some people said some things that were hard to hear." Nora considered this with great seriousness. Then she patted Clara's cheek twice, with her small hand, the way you pat something you want to comfort but aren't quite sure how. "That's not nice," she said. "They should be sorry." "Some of them might be," Clara said. "In time." Nora seemed to find this an acceptable resolution. She turned back around and settled into Clara's lap and watched the road home with the proprietary satisfaction of someone returning to a place that belongs to them. The ranch received them the way it always did now, solidly without drama. The barn and the house, and the cold Colorado air, all simply present and accounted for the wood smoke still rising thin from the kitchen chimney because Clara had banked the stove before they left. Eli saw to the horses. Ada took Nora inside, and Clara heard them on the porch, Ada retying the ribbon with the focused competence she brought to all things Nora-related, Nora providing commentary on everything except the ribbon. Clara stood for a moment in the yard between the wagon and the house. She looked at the ranch. The fence post that she and Eli had set together stood straight against the darkening sky. The chicken coop was repaired and closed for the night. The garden was properly put to bed, waiting under the hard ground for spring. The house had its light in the kitchen window, yellow and steady. She thought I did not come here expecting this. She thought I did not know when I unpinned that notice from the church board with $4 in my coat pocket that I was also unpinning something in myself. She went inside. Supper that night was simple because it had been a long day and nobody had the energy for anything ambitious. And it was also somehow one of the best meals Clara could remember, sitting down to the four of them at the kitchen table. The food plain and hot. Nora narrating a detailed account of her afternoon with Mrs. Garrett that bore only a loose relationship to what had likely actually occurred. Ada occasionally correcting the narrative with older sibling precision. Eli eating with the particular quality of a man who has come in from the cold and is aware tonight more than usual of what it means to have something warm to come in from the cold to. When the plates were cleared, Ada helped Nora wash up for bed, and Clara heard them on the stairs. Nora asking questions, and Ada answering them, with the patient cadence she'd developed over months of being the person Nora brought her questions to. And she stood at the kitchen sink and washed the supper dishes, and listened to the sound of those two voices moving through the house she'd come to know as well as any place she'd ever been. Eli came in from banking the barn stove. He moved to the counter and picked up a dish towel without being asked the same way he always did, and they fell into the rhythm of it the way they always did. And the kitchen was quiet and warm, and outside the stars were coming up over Colorado sharp and cold and brilliant. For a while, neither of them said anything. Then Eli said, "Ada was remarkable today." "She was," Clara said. She's been coming back to herself for weeks, but today I saw who she's going to be." He set a dried plate on the shelf with care. "She's going to be formidable." "She already is," Clara said. "She just didn't have room to be for a while. Too busy holding everything else up." Eli was quiet for a moment. "That's what you gave her," he said. "Room." "She gave it back to herself," Clara said. "I just stood where she needed someone to stand." He looked at her sidelong. "You do that," he said. "You have a way of standing exactly where someone needs you without making them feel like they've asked for something." Clara didn't answer that. She finished the last cup and set it on the rack. "Clara," Eli said. She turned. He was holding the dish towel in both hands, not looking at it, looking at her. He had the look he sometimes got in the evenings when he'd worked through something in the long quiet of his own thinking and had arrived somewhere and wasn't yet certain whether to say where. "The meeting's done," he said. "It is. Burwell's done. The magistrate ruled. That's finished." He held her gaze. "There's no threat behind what I'm about to say." Clara felt her heart do something she was not entirely in control of. "I know," she said quietly. "I want to ask you again," Eli said. "Not because of the board, or the deacon, or the county, or anything that happened in that church today. I want to ask you because I have been thinking about it since before any of that started, and I am thinking about it now, and I expect I will be thinking about it for a long time after, unless the answer changes the terms." He put the dish towel down on the counter. "Clara May Whitfield, will you marry me?" He said it like a statement, like a fact he was presenting that he believed to be true and was asking her to confirm. She looked at him, at this lean, worn, quiet, stubborn, achingly decent man who burned everything he cooked and fixed fence posts slower than his wife had, and went still when he was sad, and held his daughters like they were the most important cargo in the territory, and had looked at her on a train platform in October without disappointment. "Yes," she said. The word came out steady and whole, without the waver she'd expected, without the old fear moving up underneath it. Just yes, clean and real, and hers. Something in Eli's face changed, not dramatically, he wasn't a dramatic man, but in the particular way of a man who has been holding a breath he didn't know he was holding for a very long time, and has finally let it go. He stepped forward and took her hands in both of his. His hands were rough and warm and certain. He looked at her the way he always looked at her, straight on, no adjustments made for what he thought she wanted to see. "I'll do right by you," he said. "I want you to know that's not a small thing I'm saying. I mean the whole of it. All the days." "I know you do," she said. "I'll do right by you too." He squeezed her hands once. Then he let them go and stepped back. And she thought for a moment that was all, that they would simply return to the quiet kitchen and the ordinary business of the evening. And she was already deciding that was all right, that it was enough, when he leaned down and kissed her forehead the way you kiss something you've been afraid of losing. It was brief and careful and completely sincere. Clara closed her eyes and opened them again, and the kitchen looked exactly the same and entirely different. "I'll speak to the Reverend tomorrow," Eli said. "All right," Clara said. He picked up his dish towel and finished the last of the drying, and they put the kitchen to rights together in the warm, familiar silence. And Clara thought, this is what it is. Not the grand version, not the performed version. This is what it actually is. She went to check on the girls before bed. Nora was already asleep, sprawled on her back, with the absolute commitment to unconsciousness that only small children achieve, ribbon discarded on the pillow beside her, one arm thrown out to the side, as though she'd been in the middle of an important gesture when sleep overtook her. Clara pulled the blanket up and stood for a moment listening to her breathe. Ada's room was across the narrow hall. The lamp was still lit low, and Ada was in bed, but not yet asleep, lying on her side with her eyes open, looking at nothing in particular, the way you look at things when your mind is working through something. She turned her head when Clara appeared in the doorway. "You're not asleep," Clara said softly. "No," Ada said. Clara came in and sat on the edge of the bed the way she had the night Ada had come to her room with her fear about forgetting Margaret's face. Ada shifted to make room without being asked. "You were extraordinary today," Clara said. Ada looked at the ceiling. "I just said what was true." "That's the hardest thing there is to do in front of a room full of people who don't want to hear it," Clara said. "Don't diminish that." Ada was quiet for a moment. "I was scared," she said. "When I stood up, my legs were doing something strange." "That's called courage," Clara said. "It doesn't feel brave from the inside. It just feels like being scared and doing it anyway." Ada looked at her. "Is that what you felt when you spoke?" "Every word," Clara said. Ada absorbed this. Then she said quietly, "Are you going to stay now, for certain?" "For certain," Clara said. Ada looked at her with the dark, serious eyes that had been measuring her since the first moment on the platform, the eyes that had filed everything away and made no decisions until they had sufficient evidence. "Papa's going to ask you to marry him," she said. It was not quite a question. "He already did," Clara said. Ada went very still. And I said yes." Ada stared at her for a moment. Clara watched the information move across the girl's face. Not the explosion of feeling she might have expected. Not tears or exclamations, but something slower and more fundamental. The particular quality of a 9-year-old, updating a belief about the world that she had held with white-knuckled determination in the negative for a very long time. "Okay," Ada said. Her voice was steady. "Okay," Clara said gently. Ada looked at the ceiling again. Her jaw was doing the thing it did. "I prayed for it," she said very quietly, as though she was telling someone a secret she'd been keeping for a while. "I didn't tell anybody, because if it didn't happen, I didn't want—" She stopped. "I didn't want to have wanted it in front of people." "I understand that," Clara said. "Mama used to say that wanting something too loudly was the same as asking to lose it." "Your mama was wise," Clara said. "But sometimes you can want things quietly and still have them come true." Ada was quiet for a moment. Then she turned her head and looked at Clara with an expression that was not her careful measuring look, and was not her braced for impact look, and was not the look she used in public for the world's consumption, but was instead the look underneath all of those unguarded and young and entirely herself. "I'm glad you came," Ada said. "I'm glad you came, even though we hadn't written back." "I'm glad I came too," Clara said. "I think—" Ada stopped, started again with the care she applied to saying things she truly meant. "I think Mama would be glad too. I've thought about it a lot, what she would think." She paused. "She would have tested you. She tested everybody, but I think if she'd seen you with Nora on the platform with the ribbon, she'd have known." Clara's throat was doing something complicated. "Known what?" "That you were the right kind of person," Ada said simply. She had a way of seeing that. Clara sat for a moment in the warmth of that, in the gift of it, this child offering her the best thing she had, her mother's imagined approval with both hands and no reservation. "Get some sleep," Clara said finally, her voice not entirely reliable. "All right." Ada settled into the pillow. Then, as Clara rose, "Miss Clara." "Yes." "Are we going to call you something different now?" "After—" Clara thought about it. "What would you like to call me?" Ada thought too, with her usual seriousness. "I'll think about it," she said. "I want to get it right." "Take your time," Clara said. "I'm not going anywhere." She meant it as simple reassurance. She saw from Ada's face that it landed as something larger as the whole shape of everything that had changed compressed into 6 words. Ada nodded once, and Clara took the lamp down to a last faint glow and left. The wedding was on a Saturday in December, 3 weeks later. It was small and plain because that was what they both wanted, and also because December in Colorado does not encourage elaborate arrangements. The Reverend came to the ranch because Clara had privately told Eli she did not want to get married in the church where the meeting had been held, that she wanted a place that was already theirs, and Eli had agreed without a single question. Mrs. Garrett came, and Miss Holt and old Mr. Garrett, who had stopped attending gatherings of any kind 6 years ago, and made an exception for the second time in a month, and a few others who had stood and spoken at the meeting, people who had decided where they stood, and had said so publicly, and were at peace with the decision. Nora wore her best ribbon tied correctly, which she considered the full extent of her ceremonial responsibility. She stood next to Ada during the words, and held her sister's hand, and watched the proceedings with the solemn intensity of someone who understands that something important is happening, even if she could not have said exactly what. Ada wore the dress Clara had let down at the hem the week before 3 careful inches enough to last another year at least. She stood straight and held Nora's hand and watched her father and Clara at the front of the room, and her face was not the face she showed the world, but the real one underneath, open and young, and allowed finally to feel what it was feeling. The Reverend said the words. Clara's voice was steady when she said hers. Eli's voice was quiet and certain, and he did not look away from her face while he spoke. When it was done, Eli Hargrove put a plain band on Clara's finger. Margaret's had been yellow gold, and this was silver, and neither of them mentioned the deliberateness of that difference. But both of them knew it, and he held her hand a moment before letting it go, and she held his, and they looked at each other, and it was enough. Nora said loudly and without preamble, "Can we have the cake now?" The room laughed. The kind of laughter that rooms full of people who have been through something hard together produce when they're finally allowed to full and real and grateful. Clara served the cake herself. She had baked it the night before, a honey cake with dried apple, a recipe from her mother's book that she had not made in years, and it was good, and she knew it was good, and she did not apologize for it, or minimize it, or wait for someone else's opinion before deciding. Later, after the guests had gone and the girls were in bed and the ranch had settled into its evening quiet, Clara stood at the kitchen window and looked out at the dark. December stars over Colorado, sharp as a promise. The yard still, the barn dark, the fence post straight against the sky. Eli came to stand beside her. They stood together in the quiet kitchen, not touching, not needing to, the way two people stand when they have gotten past the part where proximity requires explanation. "Happy," he said. She considered the word, tried it against what she felt, found it insufficient, but also somehow exact, the way a plain word sometimes is more accurate than an elaborate one. "Yes," she said. "I didn't know I could be this." "Neither did I," he said. She looked at him. "We're going to be all right," she said. "I mean that properly. Not just fine. All right." "I know," he said. "Ada's going to be extraordinary. She already is. Nora is going to cause us significant trouble in about 10 years. He almost smiled. "I've been aware of that since approximately the first week." Clara looked back at the window at the dark ranch and the bright stars. She thought of the boarding house kitchen, of the $4.22, of the notice tacked crookedly to the church bulletin board. She thought of the train platform and the carpet bag and the 3 women already laughing before she'd even stepped down. She thought of Nora's ribbon and Ada's arms crossed at the kitchen doorway and Eli's face taking her in without disappointment. She thought of every door that had been closed and every voice that had told her what she was not, and she looked at all of it plainly and without flinching, because she had learned slowly and at some cost, but thoroughly, that the people who told you what you were not had not been measuring you at all. They had been measuring themselves. "Eli," she said. "Yeah. That man on the train platform. The one who told me I wasn't fit for any man." She paused. "I used to think he saw me clearly and said a true thing. I believed that for a long time." Eli was quiet, waiting. "I understand now that he didn't see me at all," she said. "He saw what he expected, decided what it meant, and called that seeing." She looked out at the stars. He wasn't talking about me. He was talking about his own failure of imagination. Eli put his hand over hers where it rested on the windowsill, his hand large and rough and warm and certain. "He was a fool," Eli said. "He was—" Clara agreed. "And I wasted 2 years believing a fool's verdict." "Not wasted," Eli said. "You were on your way here." She looked at him. He was looking at her with the expression she had learned finally to name, not just gratitude, not just respect, not just the complicated tenderness of a man who has been through loss and knows what it costs and chooses again anyway. All of those things, yes, and underneath them, something simpler and more complete. He saw her. He had seen her from the moment she'd walked across that platform and said her name and told him the plain truth about herself before he'd asked for it. And not once in all the weeks since had he looked at her and found something less than what he'd first recognized. "I'm going to check the barn," he said. He squeezed her hand once before he took his back. "Don't wait up." "I will anyway," she said. He put his hat on and went out into the cold, and she watched the barn door close behind him, and then she turned back to the kitchen. Her kitchen. This kitchen with the stove that drew properly, and the shelf where the cups went, and the table where Ada did her schoolwork, and Nora dropped crumbs, and the four of them ate supper together every evening without exception. She put the kettle on for the last tea of the night. She thought of what Ada had said. "I think Mama would have known from the ribbon," and she held it carefully, the way you hold something that is not yours to keep, but has been given to you anyway freely and without conditions. She thought of Nora saying Mama Clara on an ordinary Tuesday, as though it were the most natural thing in the world, as though love were a door you simply walked through when it was open, rather than a room you had to earn the right to enter. She thought of herself at 32 standing in a boarding house kitchen with $4 and a crookedly worded notice, and the absolute bottomless uncertainty of someone who has been told so many times what she is not that she has lost track of what she is. She knew now. She was the woman who tied the ribbon. She was the woman who learned to make the beans the way Margaret made them. She was the woman who sat with Ada in the dark and said, "Let me be strong tonight. You can have it back in the morning." She was the woman who walked across a train platform toward a man and two little girls who needed someone to stay and stayed. She was exactly and precisely and completely the right person for this life, not in spite of everything she'd been told she wasn't, because of everything she'd chosen to be anyway. The kettle came to a boil. Clara made her tea and sat down at the kitchen table and waited for her husband to come in from the cold, and the fire in the stove burned steady and sure. And somewhere above her, two little girls slept in the house that had learned to breathe again. And outside, the Colorado stars held their positions in the winter dark, unchanged and unchangeable and witness to everything. And Clara May Hargrove sat in the full light of her own life, and knew without qualification or condition that she had not merely survived the story she'd been given. She had written herself a better one,